Welcome to Ordinary Teachers and Students, where we get to hear teachers and students tell us their extraordinary stories. My hope is that through this podcast, ordinary teachers from around the world can relate to the stories they hear and get some timely suggestions and ideas. My name is Alan Cheng, and I'm a life coach as well as a university lecturer. My vision is to make life coaching a part of every school. Okay, today I'm delighted to invite Andrea Smith onto our podcast. So Andrea is a very experienced educator from the US. So she was a teacher and school principal for a total of 20 years. We actually met at the Jay Shetty Certification School. So we're both training to become life coaches. And let me say this, Andrea kindly agreed to be on my podcast, even when it was just an idea in my head. So I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing about Andrea's pearls of wisdom she gained from being a school teacher and principal. So let's welcome Andrea.
Hi, Alan. Excited to be
Hi.
here.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything onto that intro? So do you want to tell people what you actually do now?
Yeah.
Maybe.
So, like Alan said, after 20 years, I decided to leave my job as a school principal. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I felt pretty burnt out, pretty stressed. Felt like I wasn't really having any balance in my life, that work was kind of taking over, especially after the pandemic. And I left my job as a school principal, not knowing really what I was going to do. And then a couple months later, stumbled across this idea of becoming a life coach. And I saw a lot of similarities between working with teachers, students, families, and being a life coach. And one of the things I'm doing now is focusing some of my coaching work with educational leaders in order for them to live a more balanced, healthy life, which will hopefully impact the teachers that they work with. Because I believe that when the principal and the leaders in the school are more happy and balanced and joyful, that will trickle to the teachers having a leader that's more understanding, more compassionate, less stressed. So so that's what I'm doing now. I'm just starting that business, and I have about 6 clients, and just starting small and growing from there. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more about how if the leader at the top is doing well, it flows down, doesn't it?
Yeah, I read something, and I used to have a quote in my office that said something about the personality of the principal, the way the principal moves throughout the school and interacts with the people is replicated by the teachers. And so how the principal treats the staff is how the teachers might treat the students. And so just like, always reminding myself that the way that I carried myself was going to impact everyone within my system. Which is like such a privilege to be in that spot, and it also weighs heavy on your shoulders.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And Andrea, I mean, you did say you've left the education system, but you haven't really left. I mean, you're still contributing to education. So if you don't mind, if I take you all the way back to many years ago, what got you into teaching in the first place?
I can't believe that I had 20 years in the same profession, but feels like it just flew by. So I kind of built this out a little bit, Alan, because it's been a while since I've thought about it, but I think from a very young age I wanted to be a teacher. I knew I wanted to work with kids. At some level, I loved working with kids. When I was a teenager and on swim team, we always got to help the little 5 and 6-year-olds get to their swim races. And I was a babysitter, and I had younger cousins. And so I loved the idea of working with children. When I started college, I wanted to maybe go into psychology and work with kids that way, but really just landed on on teaching. There was like a strong pull for me to become a teacher. And I think when I was reflecting about this question, I really think it came from my struggle as a young child to read.
Do you want to tell me more? Yeah.
Yeah, so I really struggled to read,
Mm,
and I really struggled with math.
mm.
And I can remember in first or second grade, so 6 or 7 years old, we were learning about two-digit addition, and I did not understand place value at all. Like, and now that I think about it, I'm like, did my teacher even teach that, or did she? You carry the like you carry that number over, and in my like brain, I always needed to know the concept behind the procedure.
Yeah.
And in the 80s and early 90s, teachers didn't teach that way. And so
Mm,
I really struggled with like short-term memory.
mm.
Um, and I remember just like it was hard to get up the courage to ask the question. And then the answer I always got was, well, you just need to do it. Just
Yeah.
like, okay, but I don't understand, And so I was always, and I'm kind of a person like that now where I need to understand concepts. And if I don't, now, obviously, as an adult, I have the courage to ask questions and make
Mm,
meaning.
mm.
But as a child, it made me feel less than. It
Yeah.
made me feel like everybody else knew how to do it, and I was the only one.
Mm.
So I just, I had a kind of mixed bag of teachers, I think.
Right.
But I can't remember any teacher that really taught me the way that I needed to learn.
Mm. Mm. Interesting.
And so I think that's where my like desire to be that person for other kids came from.
So you kind of
Um,
wanted to be the teacher that you didn't have.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Like I really wanted to teach with compassion and patience and see it as my job to figure out how the child's brain works
Yep.
and change the way I'm doing things so it works for them.
That's
So
so
I didn't really
powerful.
have
Yeah.
that growing up.
What
So
subject did you end up teaching then?
I taught kindergarten. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
called the same thing in the UK, but
Yeah, yeah, kindergarten. Yeah.
kindergarten, first grade, second grade.
Yeah.
And one year I did a interventionist role. So it was kind
Mm,
of
mm,
working with small groups of kids
mm.
on reading interventions. And that was kindergarten through sixth grade.
Right, right, right. Yeah, sure. Okay, so we've got the start. Let's take a look at the end then. So, well, I know before we go to the end, obviously 20 years is a long time. So we do know it was a kind of a sad ending, right? So you had to leave because of burnout, stress, lack of work-life balance. But how about in between then? Like 20 years is a long time. What made you stay for so long in
Yeah.
education?
Yeah. So it was about my sixth year in the
Mm,
classroom where I decided that I wanted to become a principal.
mm,
And I did a 3-year program. So I had 9 years of teaching before moving into administration.
mm,
And the reason why I made that move, so I feel like this is kind of that in the middle portion. The
mm.
reason why I moved into administration was I was craving a larger impact.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm,
I was teaching my heart out in my classroom. I loved my students. They were doing great. But I would like work with my teammates and they weren't doing the same thing, or
mm,
they weren't following along with like what we were supposed to be doing. And so there was like a
mm,
lot of variance amongst the teachers in my school.
mm.
Um, and so I started like kind of putting my toe in for leadership teams and mentoring other teachers. And I found out I liked working with adults too.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
and I liked having that like larger impact of more than just the kids in my classroom.
Yeah, yeah.
And really, I think this goes back to why I wanted to become a teacher. Like I witnessed a lot of uh, mistreatment of students,
Right.
racism,
Mm,
um, growing up. And I ended up teaching in the same school district that I grew up in.
Mm.
So
Was that a
some
good
of,
thing or not?
I mean, it was always like, I always felt proud of that because I felt like I was
Yeah.
giving to my community.
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm,
then I felt like I was like living out my purpose to right some of the wrongs that I saw done to
mm,
kids who did not show up with as much privilege as I had as a white middle class
mm.
student.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I kind of, so that really drove me also to become a principal because I felt like I could have more influence on the structures
Yep.
that were creating. Um,
To me, it felt like you also wanted to create equality because just now you mentioned how you saw like other colleagues not kind of doing the same thing or not doing the thing that they should be doing to help the students, right? Was that
yeah,
something that you thought about too? Yeah, equality.
yeah, because we in our school district we have a lot of kids moving around. Like the school district is um, really high population of
Mm,
students that are homeless actually, and so they
mm,
they
mm,
can move around a lot within the year. And so
mm,
I always felt like they should be able to leave a school on a Friday and go on a Monday and pick up somewhere close to where they
mm,
left off on Friday, you know?
mm, mm, mm,
And that wasn't even happening within schools, let alone across schools. So, I really wanted to become a principal to
mm.
impact more students and more staff.
Sure,
Um,
sure, sure. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so I think that answered your question. That's kind of
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
middle
definitely.
portion.
Yeah, 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 sure. And like often what we do in the middle part of the podcast is simply just dive into a topic about education that you feel really passionate about. So I wonder whether any of the things that we talked about so far you would want to go deeper, or is there something else on your mind that you want to discuss?
Yeah, I'm gonna look at my notes a little bit. Yeah, so you had asked me like what's one area of education you're most
Yeah.
fascinated or passionate about. I think I couldn't narrow it down to one, but I'm really passionate about inclusion and
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go for it.
anti-racism.
Let's talk about that. What makes you so feel so strongly about it?
Um, so in my school, we had, and it's different in every school in every state and every country, but we obviously have special education, and we had self-contained programs
Mm,
for students that had significant communication or intellectual challenges or disabilities. And when I started there as a principal, they were completely separate. I had three of these programs.
mm, okay.
And to the point, even like they didn't go to recess with the other kids, they didn't eat lunch with the other kids.
Mm, mm,
And I had an experience when I was in fourth and fifth grade where I would go to help read with kids in a classroom kind of like this. So with my
mhm,
peers. And I
mm.
remember at a young age thinking like, how come I never see them at recess?
Right, right.
Where are they during lunch? And
Yeah,
so that became alongside my staff and the children's families, that became our mission to create the highest level of inclusion possible
yeah,
um,
yeah.
for those students. And so within those 7 years that I was there, we went from, I would say, complete isolation,
Mm,
like segregation, to multiple students in those special programs spending 100% of their day in general education
wow.
with special education support
Yeah,
alongside. And so
yeah.
that is
Uh,
like the thing that gave me so much joy.
Right, right. I
Um,
can tell from your face, like just how much you're smiling about it. Like
yeah,
how did you do it though? Because like it's major transformation, like you said, from segregation to inclusion, and it's quite a short period of time, 7 years, right?
yeah. I mean, we definitely had more work to do, and I don't know if I mentioned, but my school closed. My school
Okay.
district decided to
Right.
close my school because
Mm, mm,
enrollment was down across the whole district, and we had the
right.
smallest school.
Mm,
Um, but it was also one of the like highest performing and most beloved. So
Oh.
I still have like some strong feelings about it, but
Mm,
and what also was hard was that the students and the staff, we'd worked so hard on that inclusion model. They went
yeah.
they went off to schools that were starting from ground zero.
Oh, right, right,
So they
right.
lost, a lot of them lost their right to inclusion through that school
Um,
process. So that stings. But your question
mm.
was, how did we start?
How did you go about it really? Because clearly you were starting from zero too, really, right?
Uh, I mean, I definitely think the hardest part was helping all of the adults to understand the mindset,
Mm,
embody the mindset of inclusion, and to understand that a child, no matter what their disability, has a right to general education. And
yeah.
so changing people's beliefs, I think, is one of the hardest things to do.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Um,
So how did you do that?
yeah, so we did a lot of, I feel like it was a lot of social emotional learning for adults. It was a lot of creating
Mm,
safe space for people to
mm,
say what they were thinking and feeling.
mm,
So we took a lot of data around, like, where are you the most comfortable with
mm,
inclusion? What parts feel comfortable? What parts do you have fears or worries about?
mm.
And a lot of the people that were expressing the pushback, it was really about a skill deficit,
Oh, okay.
but it
What
was
what
coming.
what specifically was it like? So they didn't feel like they had the skill to.
They didn't feel like they had the skills to teach a student that had a significant disability,
Right, right.
which is also based, I found, for a lot of those people, in a mindset concern.
Mm, mm,
You have a mindset of just the student and the label, right,
mm,
of their disability. You're neglecting to see their humanity. You're
mm,
neglecting to see all the things that they can do.
mm.
And so one of the things that we did was the special education teachers created, like a matrix for every student, and it would have like their strengths, their
Ah, yeah.
interests, um, all of their kind of data sets, um, so that these other teachers could really see, like, oh my gosh, look at what these students can do.
Mm, mm,
This is
mm.
kind of like just judging a book by its cover,
Yeah, yeah.
you know? And so I would say that we took that by seeing the child as a whole person,
Mm,
helped teachers shift their mindset about
yeah.
how to teach kids with significant disabilities. And I think, like, the other thing that drove all of this forward was the other kids, all of
Oh,
the general education kids.
that's interesting. Yeah, do you want to tell me more?
Yeah, so they would, if they had a student from one of these self-contained programs that would, you know, they would see at lunchtime, let's say, but they hadn't transitioned into the classroom for reading or math or something yet, they would
Mm,
start asking their teacher, like, where's so and so? Why isn't he in here for math? Why
mm,
does he only
mm,
go to lunch with us?
mm, 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 mm,
And then I had a group of first and second graders, that asked their teacher, where do they go when they're not with us?
mm.
And so that teacher worked with the special education teacher to have general education students go to the special education classroom and also learn, like, they focus on writing.
Yeah.
And it was like, it became so much less segregated because kids, I mean, I think kids are so, like, kids, until they're taught by other adults to hate, and to, like, separate everybody
Mm,
out,
mm.
kids are so kind, like, in their core.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was just about to say, you mentioned that like for teachers, it's like a shift of mindset to treat the child as a whole, right? But clearly the students, like their classmates, they were already doing that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't really see them as different.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
or if they did, they had a way of asking for understanding, like, why does the student not speak? Why do they use an iPad? And so it was just, I think kids are very curious. And so um, kids driving that forward too was something really awesome to see.
Yeah, that must
And
have been really powerful.
it really was. And then I remember talking to parents and they were like, my kid is so different at home. Like they're so much more independent. Some of them that were verbal, like talking about new friends, new
Mm,
teachers. Like it was a really beautiful thing to
yeah,
see.
yeah. So you mentioned like teachers' mindset being difficult to change. Were there like other obstacles that you had in trying to make the school more inclusive?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the, not only the mindset, but the skills needed to teach a wide
Right.
range of abilities is,
Yeah.
for elementary teachers, they're teaching every single topic, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
on a lot to plan already. And then even if you're thinking about your own
Mm,
classroom of 28 kids, you're going to have a wide range of abilities. And so adding on,
yeah.
more students with significant challenges, like I definitely think teachers had to shift their skill set in order
Mm.
to make accommodations, to really understand how to teach. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also maybe becoming more confident, right? So I guess what you mentioned before was that some teachers didn't feel like they had the skill. So it might have also been a confidence thing where they just didn't feel confident to teach these students who were a bit different from the mainstream students, right?
yeah,
To teach these.
yeah. Sorry, you froze a little bit. 1,000%. And I think something we were good at was, and what I tried to do was when I heard pushback, I heard comments that were harsh, that were not things you would want to hear a teacher say about a student. But I tried to lead with like understanding of, taking that person aside later and saying, I heard you say this. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, how can I support you with this? Versus getting angry and thinking that that person was trying to exclude students, because it really wasn't about that, even though it came across as that sometimes. Um, and so another aspect of getting to that point of inclusion was, what supports does everyone need?
Mm.
Because you can't just have this vision for inclusion and then put kids with significant needs in a general education setting without additional support.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so it took, the speech language therapists to be in classrooms with kids. So kind of like shifting the way that that person provided services so that it wasn't so much one-on-one with the kid, but in a classroom with a kid, also working with peers and the gen ed teacher or the occupational therapist doing the same.
Mm.
So I think in order to do something that's never been done, it takes so much innovation and collaboration.
Yeah, yeah. I could tell like just all the collaboration that needed to happen and the planning behind it as well, right?
Mhm.
I'm just curious, maybe just one last question about this would be if we have like a teacher or a principal listening to this podcast and you had to give them some advice on how to make their school more inclusive, like what tips or advice would you give to them?
Um, I think to start with yourself, to really investigate your beliefs about kids.
Mm,
Like when we say this is for all students, do you really mean all students? And what are your own beliefs, biases, um, obstacles that are going to get in the way of that? Because especially if you're the school leader, people are going to look to you
Mm.
for how you move through that. Like, do you really mean all students? When challenges come up, it would be real easy to say, okay, we're going to remove this person from inclusion. The hard part is digging in and saying, no, like we have a firm line that we're going to make this work because this is the right of the student.
Mm.
So I think it starts like with your own beliefs and really investigating those. And then I think my other point of advice would be to create a culture in which people can be vulnerable.
Mm.
Because I've seen a number of teachers really struggle and they don't want to share that they're struggling. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, true, true.
I think that that is so much up to the school leader to create that culture in which people can say that they need resources, they need help.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
even if you don't have a ton of resources to provide,
Mm.
just asking a person what they need and working from there to figure something out, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, sure, sure. I think that's brilliant advice. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Are you
Oh,
ready to move on to the quick fire question? So for this part, simply, I'm going to ask you some questions. You can give a brief response, one word, two words, or even a sentence. Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
So if you think back to your teaching days, how would your students describe you?
Um, it's hard to put
Oh,
it in like one sentence, but
she's thinking.
I think compassionate
Yeah.
and um that I believe in them.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. Yeah. And what makes good teachers great?
So I kind of wrote this out. It's not one sentence, but I do I do think that it's a set of things that make good teachers great. But when I think about the greatest teachers that I've worked with, um, they have a high level of compassion.
Mm, mm,
They lead with that, and it doesn't mean they have low expectations. I think that actually the most compassionate teachers hold kids to the highest expectations. Um,
mm, mm.
but I do think that kids have to like where they are. They have to like being in school. They have to like their teacher
Yeah, yeah.
to be able to really learn.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. Next one's a big question. So if you could change one thing about the education system in your country, so the US, what would it be?
Yeah, this is a big question. I can't believe you're only going to give me one word or a sentence, but
Try your best.
I think respect for teachers and all educators is what needs to change.
Mm,
Part
yeah.
of what needs to change is to give educators more respect, is to give them more autonomy.
Mm,
I think if we left teachers alone, we stopped micromanaging and we let them have a voice in the legislation and the budgeting, I think our
mm,
school system would be in a completely different place. But
yeah.
it's overrun with lobbyists and big business and politicians. And so
People who
they
know
know,
nothing about education, right?
they know nothing about education. And I
Mm,
also think that the disrespect we see for educators is what is pushing people out of the profession.
yeah. And that's really sad, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Um, my last question for you would be, do you have a question for me? So I spent a lot of time asking you questions. So I wonder whether you have a question for me.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, like, what do you love about education?
Oh, that's going to be a long answer. I really liked being able to help other people. I think that's definitely one thing. Like just that sense of you're doing something really meaningful every day. Um, and that your job is there's a purpose to it. So obviously there's lots of people in this world who might have jobs where they're just doing for the pay. For me, it was always about the impact, the purpose rather than the pay. And so that, I think that's definitely what I like most about teaching. So obviously it can go on forever. But I guess one more thing would be the relationships you build with colleagues and also students as well. So I love it when students come back to the school to visit, or they somehow get in touch with me after they leave. So yeah. I have one final question for you, Andrea.
Okay.
And this will take us back to when you were very, very young. So just again, because obviously I'm trying to make this podcast to help other teachers. So I just wanted you to think about when you were first starting as a teacher. Okay, so imagine you're talking to that person. What advice would you give to that young Andrea, the fresh graduate Andrea, who came out ready to start her teaching career?
Yeah. So interesting because I got hired the first job I applied for, first interview I had, I got hired and I was 22 years old. And
Wow, lucky you.
I know, right? And I taught kindergarten. And I started the year with 37 kids in my class.
Ooh, wow.
And after about 6 or 7 weeks, there were 9 kids that had to move to another school. But I think about like just the optimism I had
Mm,
and how dedicated I was to the job, almost to a fault. And so
mm,
what I wish I knew then was that I needed to take care of myself better.
mm, mm.
I wish I knew that um, that my job did not define every part of me.
Right.
And I wish I knew that I didn't have to push myself so hard to climb this ladder to
Mm,
becoming um I think along the way I picked up a lot of habits that led to my burnout
mm.
that were part of the system, but also some things I placed on myself.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's what I really want to work on as a coach for
Yeah.
educator is what are those things that are within your control
Mm,
that can either lead you to burnout and stress and a lack of balance, and what are the things that you can control so that that doesn't happen to you. And then there's a
mm.
whole bunch of things outside of your control, but if you have those things that you can control that can lead you to a more balanced life, that's what I would want to point out to my
Yeah.
20.
No, that's absolutely amazing advice. So thank you, Andrea, for that. And I feel honored to be able to listen to your story because it's such an amazing story from how you wanted to become a teacher. So um, struggling yourself in school, right? And hoping to maybe make an impact on children who might have been in a similar position to you, to wanting to become a principal, to make sure you get equality in the classroom, to make sure the school's more inclusive, to now you've transitioned to a coach where you're trying to help more leaders in education so that your impact can filter down through the system. I think the one word that would summarize you, Andrea, would be compassionate. You mentioned this word many times before, and I think you are one of the most compassionate people I know. So thank you so much for being on this podcast. Um, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
In this episode, Andrea gave us some very powerful reminders about inclusion, treating students as a whole, seeing their strengths, and as teachers, reflecting on our own mindsets and beliefs towards inclusion. It also made me think about, yeah, children really don't see the differences between themselves. And so, when does it start to happen? And what's the role of adults like teachers and parents in it all? I hope you enjoyed listening to Andrea's extraordinary story, and please do join us again next time on Ordinary Teachers and Students.